They mocked him. They doubted him. They cast him aside like he was nothing. But what they never saw coming was a silent fire burning within him, a fire that would one day consume everything in its path. He didn't scream. He didn't fight back. He didn't waste time proving them wrong with words. Instead, he walked away and built himself into something they could never ignore. This is a story of a man who turned pain into power, rejection into resilience, and betrayal into an unstoppable force. This is your silent revenge, the kind that doesn't rely on anger, but on relentless success. The fall before the rise. Aryan sat in the corner of the bustling office, staring at the termination letter in his trembling hands. 5 years of relentless dedication, countless sleepless nights, and an unwavering commitment to the company, only to be discarded like an old piece of paper. "We're moving in a different direction," his boss had said, not even meeting his eyes. "It's not personal." But Aryan knew the truth. He had seen the whispers, the fake smiles, the quiet plotting. His so-called colleagues had worked behind his back, stealing credit for his ideas, manipulating numbers, ensuring that when the time came, he was the one who would be blamed. And now, they stood a few feet away, laughing and celebrating his departure, as if his downfall was their victory. Anger boiled inside him, but he did not let it show. He simply nodded, shook hands, and walked out of the building, his heart heavy, but his mind sharper than ever. That was the moment he decided. He wouldn't seek revenge with words or threats. He would let his success speak for itself. The darkest hour. Aryan returned home to his one-bedroom apartment, the walls seeming colder than before. His phone buzzed, messages from old colleagues who suddenly went silent, friends who didn't want to be associated with failure. He was alone, completely and utterly alone. Doubt crept in like a slow poison. What if they were right? What if he wasn't good enough? But then he looked at himself in the mirror, and a different thought emerged. What if they were wrong? What if this wasn't the end, but the beginning? He sat at his desk, opened his laptop, and started working. Not on finding another job, not on proving anything to anyone, but on something greater, building his own path. He revisited old ideas that had been shut down at work, concepts that had been laughed at, dismissed, stolen. He refined them, reshaped them, turned them into something undeniable. Every night blurred into morning. Every setback was met with twice the effort. He didn't post about his struggle. He didn't seek validation. He moved in silence, while the world remained oblivious to what was coming. The first glimmer of success. Months passed. The world had almost forgotten his name. But in the shadows, Aryan had built something powerful, a startup that addressed the very gaps his old company had ignored. Funding was a nightmare. Investors turned him down. Doors were slammed in his face. But the fire inside him never wavered. He adapted, he learned, he improved. And then, one day, everything changed. A small but influential client took a chance on his product. Then another, and another. Before he knew it, word had spread. Aryan was no longer the man they had discarded. He was becoming a name they couldn't ignore. His old colleagues saw his posts on LinkedIn, their laughter replaced with quiet disbelief. His former boss received an email from a competitor praising Aryan's innovation. The same people who had once shut doors in his face now found themselves standing outside his, knocking. But Aryan remained silent. No words, no gloating, just results. The turning point. One evening, as he reviewed reports in his newly furnished office, his assistant knocked. "Sir, there's someone here to see you," she said. Aryan looked up, and for the first time in years he smiled, not out of joy but out of poetic justice. Because standing there, shifting uncomfortably, was the very man who had once fired him. "Mr. Aryan," his old boss started, his voice uncertain. I want to congratulate you. Your company has been making waves. I was wondering if you'd be open to discussing a partnership." The irony was sharp, cutting through the air like a silent blade. Aryan leaned back, studying the man who had once dismissed him so easily. He could have laughed. He could have reminded him of every cruel word, every betrayal. But he didn't. Instead, he smiled, extended his hand, and said, "Let's talk." Because true revenge isn't about proving them wrong. It's about becoming so undeniably successful that their opinions no longer matter. And this was just the beginning. Aryan sat across from a man who had once thrown him aside without a second thought. The power dynamic had shifted, but he felt no rush of vengeance, no need to humiliate. His silence was enough. His presence alone was proof of his victory. His former boss fidgeted nervously. "So, about the partnership," he began, forcing a smile. Aryan leaned forward, calm, collected. "It's interesting," he said, pausing just long enough for the tension to build. "How tables turn." A flicker of discomfort passed across the man's face. "Business is business, right? We could combine forces. Your company has gained traction. We have the resources." Aryan knew exactly what was happening. His old company was struggling. The same people who had mocked his ideas were now desperate to align with them. But he wasn't the same man they had underestimated. He didn't reject them outright. That would have been too easy. Instead, he made them an offer, one so bold, so unmistakably dominant, that they had no choice but to realize who held the power now. "I'll consider it," Aryan said, his tone measured. "But under my terms." His conditions were simple. His company would retain full control. He would dictate the direction. The same executives who had plotted against him would no longer be in charge. His boss blinked, clearly taken aback. This wasn't just a partnership. It was an acquisition in disguise. The man swallowed hard. Quite the proposal. Aryan just smiled. Take it or leave it. The empire grows. The world began to take notice. Aryan's company wasn't just surviving, it was dominating. He built a team of innovators, risk-takers, and those who, like him, had been underestimated. He didn't seek revenge through destruction. He created opportunities, lifting others away no one had lifted him. The media started to cover his meteoric rise. Articles about the man who turned rejection into an empire flooded business magazines. Investors who had once ignored him now lined up, eager to be part of his vision. But Aryan never forgot. Not the sleepless nights. Not the whispered betrayals. Not the people who had laughed behind his back. He didn't need their apologies. Their silence was enough. The ultimate payback. One day, at a prestigious business summit, Aryan was invited as a keynote speaker. Thousands of industry leaders gathered, eager to hear from the man who had redefined success. He stepped onto the stage, the applause deafening. And as he scanned the crowd, his eyes locked onto familiar faces. His old colleagues, his former boss, the same people who had once dismissed him. A deep breath, a pause. Then he spoke. "I was once told I wasn't good enough, that my ideas were worthless, that I didn't belong." The room fell silent. But I realized something. The greatest revenge isn't anger. It isn't retaliation. It's proving that nothing they did could stop you, that their doubts were just noise, that your success is the only answer you ever needed to give. A standing ovation erupted, but Aryan wasn't looking for applause. He had already won the only battle that mattered, because true power isn't about proving them wrong. It's about making them realize they never mattered in the first place. And that is the best revenge.